Well, I'll tell you, it's my complete pleasure to welcome everyone here tonight to this combined meeting of the Indivisible Hope Group and the ACLU People Power. We call it the ACLU People Power and Indivisible Hope meeting tonight here at Peter Becker Community. I'm a former board member of the community here, and we want to welcome you on. I'll welcome you on behalf of the staff and the board here at Peter Becker. This is a wonderful facility. We're very pleased and grateful to have it, so we welcome you here tonight. So tonight we have turned over the agenda to the ACLU group, and now I would like Doug Ross to come forward from Lansdale chapter of the ACLU. He'll introduce the rest of the speakers for tonight, and they will take charge of the agenda. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Doug Ross. I'm a former mayor of North Wales and one of the co-founders of the Central Montgomery People Power Group from the ACLU, with Ann Montgomery, who's one of the panelists here. Her expertise is on how current law endangers internationally adopted children with the Adoptee Rights Campaign. The panel moderator is going to be Golnaz Hakimi, who's an immigrant rights attorney with the ACLU in Pennsylvania. The other panelists that we have are Montgomery County police chiefs. We'll be talking about local department accreditation, community policing, and federal immigration policy. The chiefs that we have tonight are Chief Medwood from Lower Salford, Sergeant Moyer standing in for Chief Kaczynski for Franconia Township, Chief Floyd from the Telford Police, and Chief Leary from the Soderton Police. In addition, on the panel we have Philippe Weiss, who's managing attorney of HIAS, who's going to talk about current immigration and refugee policy. Timothy Welbeck, civil rights attorney for Philadelphia chapter of CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, will talk on the impact of current policy on American Muslim communities. And Lee Detweiler, local emergency action and response network member, who will provide closing comments on community responses to hate-based acts of violence and vandalism. The structure of this is each panel member will give a 5 to 10 minute summary, and then we'll be followed by a public discussion and questions, and Lee Detweiler will do the closing comments. If I can pass this over to Glenn. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So my name's Golnaz Hakimi. I'm an immigrants' rights attorney with the ACLU of Pennsylvania, a pretty new addition to the organization, slowly but surely making my way to communities all around the state. So I'm very humbled and grateful to be with you here tonight. In my capacity as moderator, once we start with question and answers, I'll do my best to make sure that as many voices are heard as possible, and that we keep the dialogue on an even keel and covering as much ground as we can. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to the panelists. I think that on our agenda we've got the police chiefs going first, and that's all. Those are my introductory remarks. Take it away, panelists. And there's a mobile microphone for use by each panelist if you want to go ahead and pass it down towards your left. And as we progress, just keep passing it down to the right.
You hope it's not
Why am I first? Anybody else? Last is sometimes better. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for empaneling this group. My name is James P. Leary. That's Jim Leary. I'm from the Soderton Police Department. The Soderton Police Department serves Soderton Borough, and we work in complete conjunction with the 3 police chiefs and police leaders you see to my right, your left. We have a very, very dynamic, very, very community-oriented police department. And I could probably spend hours speaking about the community-oriented policing efforts that we extend in Soderton Borough. But my name is Jim Leary. I'm Soderton Police Chief. I've been a police officer in Montgomery County for a mere 43 years, and I've been a police chief for the last...
Keep it close to your mouth, please.
Thanks for the hint. I've been a police chief for a mere 43 14 years, police officer for 43, and you know, there's 28 points to police work, and the final one I'll say here is it's a privilege to serve. Thank you for having me.
Sorry everyone. Can you hear me okay? Mm-hmm. All right, so I'll have to do a mea culpa here. This is my first time moderating. But before we continue with the remainder of the panelists, I initially neglected to kind of go over some of the broader topics and themes that the panelists will cover.
I don't have to do it again, do I?
No! No, you're spared. But this is just so that folks in the audience have an idea of the specific topics and ground that we're going to cover. And I'll keep this close. So Philippe Wise from HIAS will kind of broach some of the particular immigration policies that are in practice on the ground as a result of the new administration, and may also touch upon the specific issue of Dreamers, which was part of what Christine incorporated into her inspirational talk. You know, the chiefs that we've got with us here, I think, are in a position to speak to how enforcement of the federal immigration laws does or doesn't jibe with the priorities of local law enforcement and the work that they're charged with doing, and how their work is or isn't impacted by federal immigration policy. I believe that Timothy is going to get at the impacts on Muslim American communities here in PA, whether they are foreign born, are immigrants or otherwise, and Anne-Marie is going to address the issue of how current laws and policies in particular put foreign adoptees at risk. And Lee, I think, is going to close by talking about community-based responses to hateful acts, whether they're against immigrants, whether they're against Muslims, but against community members, and what concerned community members can do. So forgive the interruption, but with that I'll turn it back over to the panelists. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is George Moyer, and I'm with Franconia Township Police, and I'm a sergeant with Franconia Township Police. I've been here for 29 years and hope to be here a few more years yet. Seen a lot of things change with a lot of the different laws through that whole 29 years that I've been here, as have the other chiefs that are sitting at the panel. We're a very diversified township, many different people of different nationalities within our township, not only living here but also working here. I'm glad to be here tonight to help explain things for you people.
Good evening, Chief Randall Floyd from Telford Borough. I've been in law enforcement for 31 years. I've been chief for 8. I grew up in Souderton, lived in this area all my life, and now live right around the corner here on Polk Road. And I've seen this area change dramatically. When I was in elementary school at E.M. Crowd Hamel School, the most diversity there was you were either Lutheran, Catholic, or Mennonite. And I remember when the first Latino family moved to our community and came to our school, it was a big, big deal. 45, almost 50 years later, I go to E.M. Crowd Hamel School, where many of our students from Telford live, and it is so diverse. And there are so many different races and cultures there in the same school. Our community has changed a lot. As a local law enforcement agency, a borough where we tend to have some lower rents, and we seem to give residence to people in the lower income. We tend to have a lot of immigrants that live in Telford today. We go out of our way to welcome them. To answer in one sentence some of the questions here is local law enforcement. We do not have a place in the federal immigration. We encourage our families to come to us if they need help. There's proactive things that we have done, and we're there. We want everyone to feel, hey, if you're in need of the police, you come to us. We're not going to ask you if you're here legally or not. I could go right now and, without any trouble, find 50 people who I know are here illegally, if that term's acceptable. That's not my job. Our job is to keep the peace in the community. We take great pride in that, and we want to do the same, treat everybody the same, regardless if they lived here and grew up in Souderton and Telford area, Indian Valley area, or if they moved here 6 months ago and they're from another country. So, thank you.
Good evening, I'm Tom Medwood. I've been a police officer in Montgomery County for 36 years and chief in Lower Salford for the last 18 of those years. In Lower Salford, we have almost zero experience with immigration issues, so I'm here to learn more about those issues tonight and with this panel and with questions and answers. As far as community policing and accreditation, we're very involved in those issues and happy to discuss what our involvement is with those, but really appreciate having us come out tonight. Thank you very much.
I'm just a little confused. Am I doing my presentation right now or just introduction? Yes. In presentation. Okay, great. Hi, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening. My name is Philip Weiss. I'm the managing attorney at Highest Pennsylvania. Highest Pennsylvania is a nonprofit refugee resettlement and legal services organization based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but we also provide services throughout various surrounding counties with a strong presence here in Montgomery County as well. We're pleased to be here. I was asked to talk about current immigration policies in 5 minutes, so I'm going to talk really, really quickly, okay? Let's put it this way. I've been an immigration attorney for over 20 years now, and I have never seen the situation that immigrant and refugee communities are facing today. You're hearing it day in, day out. You've heard it day in and day out over the last year or so. And let me just touch really briefly on what I'm talking about when I'm saying we've never seen this broad-based attack on immigrants and refugees. So first and foremost is obviously DACA. DACA has been terminated by the administration. There's been some challenges in the courts, and those are kind of winding their way through. But in short, there's close to 700,000 individuals, the dreamers, right, who are about to lose 100. There'll be about 100 per day starting on March 5th who will be losing their work permit. And what that means is losing their work permit, losing their driver's licenses, and losing that opportunity to kind of remain part of the community and kind of being forced back into the shadows. Add to that about another 300,000 or so individuals from various countries who will be losing their TPS or temporary protected status. Here in Montgomery County, particularly in the Souderton area, there's a large Salvadoran community. Many of those individuals have been here in this country for well over 20 years, by definition of the protections that they've been receiving. Those individuals will again be driven underground, impacting not just themselves, but of course their children and their families that they've raised amongst us as neighbors. And in addition to that is, of course, internal enforcement. Most recently, a couple of weeks ago, we heard the nationwide raids that occurred at 7-Eleven stores around the country. There's been a 40% increase in local in internal immigration enforcement raids. Okay, and those are impacting communities across the country. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about Souderton or we're talking about supposed sanctuary cities such as Philadelphia. Those actions are happening on a daily basis, impacting communities, of all races and religions. And then finally, of course, and kind of this is what how the administration started, was of course with the Muslim ban and the refugee ban. Okay, and those and its various permutations have kind of gone through the courts. We're now in its third iteration. But let me tell you about how it's impacting the refugee community. So for example, our agency is a middle-sized refugee resettlement organization. We resettle approximately 200 or so individuals, 200 refugees per year, okay? We are now in the second quarter of the fiscal year, and we should have resettled about 50 individuals at this point, okay? We have resettled at this point 18 individuals. You've heard the numbers, right? The refugee crisis that the world is facing is the worst since World War II. And the numbers of refugees that the country generally resettles, right, has been around 85,000. Under the last year of the Obama administration, he sought to increase it to 110,000. And unfortunately, this administration has now set the limit at 45,000. However, if the admissions continue at the rates that they are today, there's no way we're going to come close to that. And so that is not only affecting kind of our country's responsibilities to refugees around the world, but it's also truly is essentially going to eliminate our country's ability to resettle individuals. And the reason for that is the following. If our agency can't keep the doors open, because our refugee resettlement wing is primarily federally funded, then there's going to be no more refugee resettlement happening in the United States. And I don't think it's a far stretch to say that is the goal of the impact. So if you look at all of this, what is happening, and I think the best summary of what's happening is a couple of months ago I was in an event that was targeted, reaching out to immigrant communities in South Jersey. Went out there and we gave a presentation, and we were meeting with individuals from all over the world. And a gentleman came up to me, he was about my age, spoke very well in English. Said, "Excuse me, I just had one question for you." And I turned around, I was actually speaking with somebody else, and he asked me, he says, "I'm a US citizen, I naturalized a couple of years ago. When I'm driving, should I carry my US passport with me?" And I stopped for a second. I said, I wanted to say, well, that's crazy. And then I was like, that's not crazy anymore. And that's kind of the impact that we're seeing. So imagine naturalized US citizens, facing those fears. You can imagine that what's happening in the communities who are green card holders, permanent residents, those people who are on temporary visas, not to mention those who are undocumented individuals. And so that's kind of the impact that is happening throughout our communities. Sure, I think I took over 5 minutes, so I'll stop there.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Timothy Welbeck. I'm the civil rights attorney for the Philadelphia chapter of Council on American Islamic Relations. And in many ways, most of what I would say in terms of how the current immigration policies have been enforced would echo much of what Felipe has just said just now, particularly as it relates to Muslims across the state of Pennsylvania. What I'm routinely seeing and hearing is not only this greater sense of trepidation, but also a greater level of hostility towards them. And it's almost, just on an anecdotal level, I can almost, without even watching my television, know when the president has said something inflammatory, because I'll get a significant wave of calls within a couple of days or so of those remarks being made, particularly as we're talking about the idea of immigration and how that impacts them. Much of the way many of these policies are enforced are bigoted in nature, particularly just the idea in and of itself, the way in which the travel ban, the Muslim ban was implemented was codified bigotry. And so much of the idea then of what it means to be foreign, what it means to not be American is based on appearance. Are you white? Are you not white? And so if you are not white, then there's this presumption then that you are not American. And so then there's this idea that you must then prove that you are American, prove that you are legitimately here. And if you cannot, then you're subject to this harassment, you're subject to these additional checks and things of that nature, and it impacts everything. Can I go home and visit can I leave the country and travel? Whether it means visiting a sick relative or just traveling because I want to travel. If I'm in the airport, am I subject to a random search that I know is not random because every time I go to the airport, I'm subject to one of these searches? Does it mean that my children can be pulled from school? I'm routinely met with parents who are talking about their children being bullied and things of that nature. And then of course it comes the epithets of being a terrorist and things of that nature. And much of this is because people who hold these beliefs have been emboldened by the president's rhetoric. He began his presidential campaign with this type of rhetoric. He's continued and turned the rhetoric into policy. The policy, as we have discussed, is bigoted in nature, and we're grateful for chiefs like Chief Floyd and his colleagues who are showing a level of empathy and compassion and preserving the peace. But some of their colleagues are not doing that. And so that's why I have a job, to be perfectly honest. That's why many of my colleagues have a job, because these things are routinely happening to people. And just the idea in and of itself, the Muslim ban, when you're thinking about the countries that were listed, and then the idea that they were selected in part because they're Muslim majority countries, and September 11th is part of the motivation, or at least the stated motivation in implementing it. And then you look at Saudi Arabia as not one of the countries that's on the list, and you can make your presumptions about why that is. I have my theories, I will leave them to myself at this moment. But all in all, to say that in the short time that I've been at CARE, and talking to my predecessor, there has been an increased level of hostility, particularly as it relates to travel, immigration, and the like, to the point that it's difficult to manage in and of itself. My predecessor was talking about things were somewhat slow when I was hired, and just my experience has been significantly different.
Hi, my name is Ann Montgomery, and I just want to start off with a little audience participation. How many of you guys, and raise your hands if you do, know someone who's adopted? Okay. How many of you have an adopted person in your family or within your close circle of friends? Great. All righty. How many of you believe in your hearts that adoption should provide a safe, secure, and permanent home for an adoptee? All right, we're in agreement right now. How many of you believe that adoptees should have the same rights, privileges, and protections under U.S. law and the Constitution as children who are born to their parents? Okay. Such as, let's say, the right to vote, work, travel, have a driver's license, inherit property when their spouse dies, adopt a child if they wish to. Well, how many people here believe that all parents are perfect, always have their children's best interests at heart, and all really do everything they need to protect their children? All right. So, yeah. So, I'm going to be an intersection here on these issues, because the truth is that parents fail their children. And when a parent makes a child unsafe, the state has a legal as well as a moral obligation to protect that child. But the state is not doing that for children who are adopted, particularly children who are adopted by U.S. citizens from overseas. This means that we got a problem. But there was a solution. Before 2002, and this will come as a surprise to almost everyone in the room, no child adopted by a U.S. citizen automatically had a right to U.S. citizenship. Okay? So let that sink in. No child got citizenship by virtue of adoption. Okay? In 2002, that changed because Congress, in its infinite wisdom, passed the Child Citizenship Act of 2000, which went into effect in 2002. But it excluded two groups. Everyone who was 18 and over at the time of implementation, whose parents had not already finalized that adoption through a readoption process in the United States and naturalized their child. And every child who would be adopted from then on, whose process was deemed by the U.S. government to be incomplete. So what does this mean? Let's talk some numbers. 100,000 South Korean children were adopted by US citizens over the last 60 years. The South Korean government, unlike the US government, tracks the status of their adoptees. 20% of US citizens, just like me, an adoptive parent, did not finalize their child's adoption and naturalize their children. That means we have 20,000 adult Korean adoptees today without citizenship. Now, they're not the only ones. The reasons vary, and you can ask me about this, and I'm happy to answer, but they come down to parents were either misinformed by the US government itself, by their adoption attorneys, by their adoption agencies, or they knew full well they needed to do this and just didn't get around to it, or refused. Okay? So, we can all agree that not all parents are perfect. Some are neglectful, some are uninformed, and some are abusive. We have, from 1948 to 2014, 354,000 children who were adopted by US citizens that were born abroad. Since we know that 20% of Korean adoptive parents failed their children, let's run the numbers. If 20% failed these children, we're looking at 70,000 adult adoptees without citizenship. We can't back that number up because the US government doesn't track this. And we're going to be honest with you about the numbers here. So we usually use a figure of 35,000, but we know that's low. But let's talk about what the US government does track, because I spent my day doing those numbers. State Department has available on their website from 1999 to 2016 that 267,000 children were adopted and processed for visas through the State Department by US citizens. 144,000 of those were issued IR4 and IH4 visas from 137 countries. If you get an IH4 or an IR4, you are not eligible for coverage under the Child Citizenship Act of 2000. So how many of those children, who are all minors right now, will not have their parents readopt and finalize their naturalization process? The truth is we don't know because we don't have a crystal ball. But let's say that 10% of them don't. Let's say that we've improved from that 20% number. We're looking at 14,000 people. So, top countries. So, all of you who knew those adoptees, do you have friends who adopted from South Korea? Got 19,222 people came in on the wrong visa. Guatemala, 16,000. Ethiopia, 8,000. China, 6,000. Oh, you China families, I'm one of them. You are not excluded from this. India, 4,000. The Philippines, 2,000. Romania, 1,900. Uganda, 1,500. Congo, Kinshasa, 1,200. Liberia, 1,000. Those are only the top 10, folks. Pennsylvania has 643 adoptees processed between 2008 and 2016. How many of those 643 children will have parents who don't get the job done? I don't know. But I can tell you what it'll look like year by year on how many might process out without. So I'm going to ask you guys, who are we as a country? If we sanction the practice of international adoption, if adoption is to function as intended, I believe it must operate on a sound legal basis that guarantees the safety and security of each and every child, no exceptions. I believe it's unconscionable, unethical, and un-American to continue this way. So I'm here on behalf of the Adoptee Citizenship Act, which is an organization, a grassroots organization, run by adult adoptees without citizenship, and allies like myself. And I'm asking for you to do a couple things. On the table over there are these postcards. I want you to put your name and your mailing address on it and leave it on that table for me to deliver to your member of Congress. And I want to ask you to pick up one of these. I want you to join my lobbying team. We are systematically meeting with every single member of Congress in the state of Pennsylvania, and we go beyond. We travel. When they call us and they need us to show up in DC, we show. and we've got immigration attorneys on our team. And we are powerful when we speak, because the truth of the matter is this: all of these adoptees are people of color. And when their white parents speak, we get listened to more than they do. That's unconscionable, but that's the truth. So we need to speak, and we need to also say to these members of Congress, no, you need to listen to them speak now. And you need to fix this. The Adoptee Citizenship Act will be reintroduced in Congress soon. And frankly, if you know somebody in North Central Pennsylvania, we need you to call your congressman, because he's our only member on the Judiciary Committee, and we need him to be a co-sponsor. So you can join my team, and at a minimum, you can call your congressman tomorrow and say, why haven't you reintroduced and passed this bill? This is obscene. And we'll need you to write letters to your editor, and we are now talking about the potential of a 50-state strategy of trying to get some legislation at the state level. Because I can tell you, when these officers remove a child from a negligent or abusive parent and that child enters the foster care system, nobody checks to see if that child has been naturalized, if they were adopted, and that child will then, frankly, lose the ability for anybody to advocate for their citizenship or sponsor them, and they will age out. And they can tell you what happens to kids in foster care and how it increases their chance of criminal activity. These children, now adults, and the future children who will join them are priorities for deportation. We have and are deporting them now, including veterans with PTSD, and all they have to do is get a violation of any law for that to happen. So we need your help, and we can make this happen. Thank you.
So I think now we're turning to the question and answer. Oh, I think that Lee is going to be doing...
Anybody else feeling overwhelmed?
Well, no, I think...
Just listen to all of it, I'm going, damn, this is a tough situation.
Yeah, I think on the agenda we've got...
Yeah, I'm doing the closing, but I just kind of wanted to say, in listening to these folks, my name is Lee Detweiler. I'm a social worker professionally. We started an organization in Jenkintown, Elkins Park, called Learn Local Emergency Action Response Network. And we started after the election, and the idea behind us was to step up when there were acts and respond when there's an act of hate. And it has morphed into something a lot different. We still do it. As a matter of fact, there's a vigil right now in Willow Grove that's being run by our organization because the KKK dropped flyers. So that's sort of who we are, and I can talk about things. At the end, I'll tell you some of the things that we're doing, because ultimately, these are massive changes, and it's a very painful and overwhelming time. But the good news is, there's a lot of things you can do locally that might seem small, but they certainly matter. Okay? That's what I wanted to let you know, and I'll talk about that.
That sounds great. I mean, in that same vein, I think if it's not already clear, folks on this panel and myself as moderator, we're available as resources to those of you in the audience who are aware of problematic instances that touch upon any of the issues that have been broached, whether it is the status of an adoptee, which is within Anne's wheelhouse, whether it's about the availability of status or some defense against removal, that might be something within Philippe's wheelhouse. If you're aware of instances involving members of the community who have been targeted problematically on the basis of being Muslim, that's something within Timothy's wheelhouse. And for kind of broader immigrants' rights issues, it's certainly within my wheelhouse. There's an assortment of information and materials on the tables to the side. So just a quick reminder to folks that in addition to taking action because you yourself feel concerned, if you're aware of directly affected individuals, you can reach out to those of us up at the front here, and we can figure out if there might be resources available to help those folks. But now that we're turning to the question and answer portion, here's what I propose in the interest of time and covering as much ground as possible. I'll ask folks to raise their hands. We'll take maybe a series of questions, which I'll record, and then I'll turn to the folks at the panelists table, and we'll go through kind of questions one by one in batches, okay? So go ahead, folks who have questions, and raise your hands, and then we can kind of proceed that way. Okay, folks who have questions, raise your hands. All right, I'm going to start with the lady with the microphone. All right, fair enough. And what I'll ask is that you keep your question pithy. I'll record it. We'll move on and record a few more, and then we'll let the panelists answer. Okay?
Thanks to everybody. I would like to hear actually from our local law enforcement officers. The suggestion had been that you have experience with also where you see a conflict between what the federal government would have you do and what locally you end up finding, and where you find that to be conflict-oriented for you, and in conjunction with that, where we as local citizens can help provide some assistance to your efforts. Thank you.
Great. Let's go ahead and take a few more questions, and you can kind of pick the audience members as you see fit. And I'm making a note of the questions as we go. Go ahead.
Along the same lines, to the police chiefs here, if ICE asked you to help them round up undocumented immigrants, would you do so?
Okay. Let's take two more and then turn it to the panelists.
Another one for, again, the police chiefs. Trump keeps talking about sanctuary cities. What's the difference between that? Is it state government versus local government? Is there a difference and a different obligation there?
It looks like we've got a batch of questions here for the police chiefs, so let's go ahead and turn it over to them. I'll kind of review with the first one. So the first question was for someone among the police chiefs to address to address what conflict, if any, they see between the enforcement of federal immigration laws, maybe pressures coming from the federal government for local law enforcement cooperation on the one hand, versus using local resources to take care of local law enforcement priorities, how those things do or don't conflict. And I'll leave it to you guys to choose who will answer that.
They left me with the microphone. Yes, to answer your question, I think I understand what you're asking, but I personally, and I have talked to many chiefs in Telford, I'm in both counties, Bucks and Montgomery, and I've talked to chiefs in both counties, and the general feel from the local police chief is that this is not a conflict, it's not our job. It's spelled out in law that we do not have a role in that. In fact, I recall some years ago where we had people at that time from, it wasn't called ICE at that point, INS, thank you, who actually at a training seminar were emphatic about the local police not entering into that, and nothing has changed. I don't believe any of us here see it as a conflict. I mean, our role is very clear. That's to protect our community, and that is everybody in our community, regardless. So I hope that answers your question.
So the second question here maybe could be answered by the group of chiefs, but it's the question of if you were asked by federal immigration authorities to help round up people in your communities lacking valid immigration status, what would you do? Would you do it? What would your response be? And it might be useful to the audience to hear from each of you.
Thanks for the question. And it's actually a remarkably easy question to answer. Never in my history in law enforcement, that's 43 years in Montgomery County, never have I been asked to participate in an ICE raid to round up citizens. Never once. In the last 8 years within Solderton, the only information within the local police information exchange with ICE has been dealing with investigation of open criminal cases and not immigration cases. So I can tell you that there has never been an instance in my career where the Solderton police have participated in the roundup of immigrants, ESL, any person with having an immigration status. Not even one that I can think of. Thank you.
I don't know if the other chiefs want to speak to this too, or
Same experience.
same experience.
It's basically the same for all of us. The immigration in our area, we accept it. And we're here to do the same for them that we do for anybody else. We have never, in my experience of 29 years, never been involved in anything rounding up immigrants for the federal government.
Likewise, same experience. Our role for in the future, if that would occur, we take a. I would liken it to assisting somebody who's repossessing a car, doing a domestic standby, where there's conflict between people and the officers keep the peace. We may have be involved in a presence, but certainly not in the enforcement of that at all.
Likewise.
So the third question, sort of geared towards the police chiefs, has to do with what light they can shed on the issue of sanctuary policies, sanctuary jurisdictions, to the extent, depending on what the chiefs are able to offer. I'm happy to kind of flesh that out for interested folks in the audience after they speak.
Well, if I understand that part of the question, I think it's the same as our assistance to federal agencies. We're not being asked to do that, and so I think I speak for all of us, but certainly for Lower Salford, it's purely hypothetical, but it just doesn't fall into our role. I mean, I think we would all agree that we're understaffed in this area, and we don't have a bat phone on our desk, to the feds. It just doesn't happen. Well, it is a perception. We've met locally with our school district to see what, and it was the same conversation. I think there's a misperception that we have a list of people we're looking for. We do not. Or if a phone call is made that we're going to go out and perform the role of the feds, we do not. Couldn't if we wanted to, and we don't want to.
One of the agenda items tonight engaged community-oriented policing. And we're talking about community-oriented policing, especially with the immigrant community. And I had some thoughts prepared, and then as I looked out into the audience tonight, those thoughts got an exclamation point put on the end of it. Seated to my right is Chief Floyd. A lot of people don't know this, but for more than 10 years, Chief Floyd has been a volunteer, a very, very emphatic volunteer, and very much a leader in Keystone Opportunities. Now, how many people in here know what Keystone Opportunity? Oh, good, I don't have to define it. Oh, that's great.
Contributions are accepted.
And what's really interesting, for more than 10 years, Chief Floyd has been a very, very dynamic leader within Keystone Opportunities. I can tell you that for the last 8 years, I have been very dynamically involved with Keystone Opportunities. I am not a leader, I am simply a worker. But I would like to share something with you. Last year, 2017, we ran, our police department hosted, sponsored, or significantly created about 6 community-oriented policing events, car shows, community nights out, fireworks. And at each one of these, I personally reached out to Keystone Opportunities and invited them to create a food drive and a fun drive at the event. And those food drives and fun drives were met with various success. A couple of them were incredibly successful, a couple of them were marginally successful, but all of them were successful. And on top of that, I'd like to share something with you, and this is very much on a personal note. On January 6th, which was a Saturday, I went to a home in Telford, and I went there as a Keystone volunteer, and I spent the Saturday cleaning a kitchen and painting that kitchen so that that house could be turned over to a family. In December, I did the same thing, and in November, I did the same thing. And I know that Chief Floyd has done some of those same things. So those particular issues, that particular sense of volunteerism was directed to Keystone Opportunities. And I actually see some people in the class that we taught together. Is that correct? Yeah. We taught English as a second language together. We taught family literacy together. I'm telling you, the chiefs of police in the front of this room and the departments that they represented reach out to the community on a regular basis and reach out to our ESL community, reach out to our family literacy community, reach out to our immigration community, and we contribute our funding, our foods, and our efforts. And I can tell you that.
One other point of interest with Franconia, the immigration falls close to our heart. One of our officers has adopted two young girls from China, and both have special needs. So, you know, we love them just as much as we would love our own children. You know, he's part of our family, and it's, you know, everybody does everything we can for him.
So I'm gonna add very, very quickly something about what sanctuary policies are, how interested community members who are living in areas that haven't yet adopted formal sanctuary policies, maybe steps that they can take to begin conversations with the stakeholders in their local government about perhaps going forward with that kind of policy if the community is interested. But in short, folks may know already, based on remarks that have been made by the panelists, including the police chiefs, that there are differences between what the federal government and the federal laws cover and what state and local laws and law enforcement cover. As you've heard, it's not within the wheelhouse under the law or otherwise for states and localities to go about the business of enforcing federal immigration law. So recognizing that distinction, some localities, including the city of Philadelphia here in PA, have resolved as a matter of policy to draw certain lines when it comes to information gathering about questions going to foreign nationality or immigration status, information sharing, and also the circumstances under which, in the criminal justice context, which non-citizen defendants may or may not be a subject of communication or cooperation between local law enforcement and federal immigration authorities who believe that that same non-citizen criminal defendant is subject to removal. So these kinds of policies have taken root in certain localities around the country, and they are the subject of rigorous debate and also very heated litigation. But I think that the litigation so far is bearing out that these policies can pass legal muster, So I would just repeat here that for folks in the audience who have an interest in starting dialogues about possibly going forward with such policies in your own communities, that there are ways of going about that, and there's guidance available for folks who want to start those conversations. But let's go ahead and resume with collecting some questions. Again, let's do it in batches. I don't want to clip anybody's wings, but since a number of questions have been addressed to the police chiefs, it'd be great to have some questions maybe geared towards the other panelists. And it looks like Anne has a comment she wants to make.
I have a comment and a question. The first comment is that I'd like to stress that Doug and I, on behalf of People Power in Lansdale, we both have a real deep interest in community policing, so we've become involved with the local Montgomery County Police Chiefs Association, and if you're interested in becoming involved in some incredibly exciting initiatives we're working on, please talk to us, because Doug, as a former mayor, has really had to deal with local police issues as a mayor for a long time, and I was formerly federal law enforcement, so policing is near and dear to our hearts for different reasons and for different approaches. But I have a question, because I know I'm seeing this on Facebook from people, and I believe I know the answer, but I don't know it as a lawyer would answer it. So I'm going to throw out the question about, people are complaining about these DACA kids. Why didn't they take care of it? So I want to ask the question, can we definitively address, can a child under the age of 18, without their parents' assistance, apply for their own naturalization or a change in status? So do we want to do more questions first?
Since you've broached that question, it might make sense for Philippe, I think, to take a crack at answering, and then we can turn the floor back over to the audience to capture another bundle of questions.
I think the answer to that is relatively easy and also quite complicated. So I'll give the easy answer. And the easy answer to that is no. No, children cannot, there's no kind of special relief available to them. And I have here with me, and I wish I had a slide of it, but I'll leave it out here for those of you who are interested. It came out several years ago, and it kind of goes to the question of, why don't the kids, why don't the DACA, why don't blah blah get in line? And the fact is that there simply is no line, and this kind of complicated, very colorful chart kind of just shows how impossible it is. So I have a couple of copies of this. I'm happy to kind of share it here, and if the organizers want to share this, certainly can.
Can I clarify, that would apply to our adoptees as well as the DACA kids. No child can do this by themselves.
Correct.
So let's
Can
go.
I just really quickly, just since I have the mic. First, I want to applaud the police chiefs here for taking such a strong stance on this issue. It really is so critical, not just for our immigrant communities, but the truth of the matter is it's a public safety concern for all of us. And I think that it's obvious that the police chiefs understand that, and we really need to ensure that other police chiefs understand that. And sadly, the federal government is pressing different police organizations to adopt what's called a 287G agreement. And essentially what 287G, provision in the Immigration Nationality Act, would essentially deputize local law enforcement to be immigration agents. Now clearly, I want to be clear here, okay, the police chiefs here have clearly stated that they're not interested in this, and that's why we applaud their trial. Unfortunately, it's not the same in other places. In Ben Salem, they're currently seeking to enact an agreement with federal government for 287G. And so some of the work that you can be doing on the ground locally is kind of speaking out in favor of the police chiefs who are against such policies and really making a voice heard on that.
Okay, so if at all possible, just to sort of cover as much varied ground as we can, I'd ask for folks now to raise their hand who maybe have questions for other panelists besides the police chiefs. But of course, if that's the priority and sort of the hot button sector of the panelists that you want to have answers from, so be it. But let's go ahead and collect another batch of 3 questions. Okay.
Part of my question it was answered by immigration attorney Philip, but also I appreciate too much you stand here. I'm an immigrant from Mexico, and definitely the 287G program started in 2010 in Montgomery County, affected too much the immigrant community. And I have several histories of immigrants from all around the county plus Bethlehem. But this is sadly like we recognize every community have people who is fall in criminal issues. We know like every year 400,000 people should be deported because in Obama administration is 2 million of people. We are really concerned. I'm a community organizer, I'm a court advocate at the Women's Center of Montgomery County, attending the 5 offices in the county. And for me, it's very sad to know what many women or many victims of domestic violence didn't go to our organization because they are afraid to, if somebody answer what is the immigration status. And definitely, I appreciate too much you stand up. This is the federal level, and you are in the local level, but I appreciate how you can support the immigrant community. Thank
you. This lady here has been after me.
Oh boy, okay. Kind of to add off that, and I applaud, thank you police chiefs for being here, but just 2, I guess, just comments to the police chief that had, especially for Chief Floyd, or Randall, I'm sorry.
Chief Floyd.
Floyd, I'm sorry.
I think my mother calls me Randall.
Okay, well, all right. And, you know, I think kind of in listening to all of your police chiefs, it sounds like the same kind of sort of dialogue is being said kind of over and over again, that our community is diverse when it maybe not be as diverse as other communities, and as well as kind of how you stated that, you know, people should just feel comfortable in walking in, you know, to the police station. And I do think for minorities especially, and illegals, and definitely other, you know, individuals, the police have not always been their friend. And it's not something they're gonna walk into and feel comfortable. And even though you guys are not directly ICE, it stems from there though, oftentimes. Either from minor charges that get dropped to the DA then notifies ICE, and so on. So, you know, you might not have a large role in it, but there is kind of possibly a small role. And I've just, I guess, wanted to see how, if there's any talk about changing the dialogue of making the community more, I don't even want to say community policing, but I don't know, just changing the dialogue of that and the understanding that it's not that simple as somebody walking in. Am I going to get pulled over after this?
I'm not sure that you can do this tonight, but what I would like to have happen is to leave with the leadership of Indivisible Hope, whatever or whoever is up there, something that can help the schools, community businesses, and it may come out if we decide as a community to go through sanctuary. How do you protect or educate or give information to places as inside the schools to what do you have to turn over if ICE would come in? Do you have to turn over an 18-year-old in a high school? Do you have to come into a business and let them take out a person? And is there any way of stopping it if we don't all know the truth or what's going on? So I don't know if there's a cheat sheet or if there is something short legal on that.
Let's take one more question and then have the panelists address this batch of 3, and then time allowing, we'll keep moving on, okay?
Hi, mine follows along also with a public safety question. I've been a teacher in this district for 33 years. It's so great to see so many wonderful folks out. I know that during our years we had at times Vietnamese students come in, At the end, we had the Sudanese boys come in. At certain times, there was some, I wouldn't call it hate crime, but some name calling and some uncomfortable encounters, and I taught a course that dealt with that. I'm asking everybody on the panel, what have you seen since the day after the election when there was some name calling and spray painting on walls? Have you seen an uptick in unkindness, writing on walls, pushing, shoving, any hate acts? And I know we're going to talk to that too. I had a club at the high school with students in cultural awareness, and we worked on issues like this when I was a teacher there. So I'm very interested in has this gotten worse in this past year?
So I'm going to go ahead and kind of start with the first question, which was addressing the police chiefs. I believe the question was that the position that's been taken is very worthy and worthwhile, and of course we applaud the chiefs on the panel, but the audience member recognized that in open criminal matters, there's some degree of information sharing that is taking place, and that has its ripple effects into the community in terms of the comfort of community members in otherwise engaging with the police. And so I think the audience member's interest is in hearing from the police chiefs, hearing a response from the police chiefs about that question. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
They gave me the mic and won't take it back. In answer to the lady's question about comfort coming into the police station, there's absolutely some discomfort. And that discomfort, there's two sides to it. What are we creating? What is the government entity? What's the guy in the uniform? What's the guy in the badge or the lady in the badge? What are they creating? And what's coming from the other side? What's internalized to the person that should come to the police department? And we work on ours by being extremely invitational. I will give you one brief anecdote, and I have people in the room that actually witnessed this. When the opportunity to teach English as a second language came up, and to teach to, I believe there was 11 separate languages in the room. I was concerned that I might intimidate people and that I might turn them away. So my first class, I came attired in a suit, much the same as I am now. After I was introduced to the class and spent about an hour and a half with the class, the second time I came wearing a dress blues uniform. No, excuse me, the second time I came wearing business casual clothes, the way most people are attired in this room. The third time that I came in, I wore dress blues, which are certainly a military uniform, but less intimidating than the duty uniform. And then the fourth time I came in, hoping to welcome them wearing the duty uniform. So I was sensitive to that, and I made sure that I did what I could from my side to make them welcome to speak to me. I'm not sure how much I succeeded in that from the other side. I don't know that. I do know that one member of the class came to me about the 5th or 6th class in and indicated that another member of the class had been the victim of domestic violence, and we were able to address that issue of domestic violence. So as to the comfort level, I'm not sure we're succeeding. I know that to some degree we're succeeding. I know to some degree we're failing, but we are welcoming and getting the information out there. It's a difficult thing to do, but we are doing it. Whether we're succeeding or not, I don't know how to measure that. And then the other question was, the other half of the question dealt with?
Well, so I think the context for the question was this recognition that in open criminal matters involving non-citizen defendants, there's some degree of information sharing happening, and knowledge of that adds to the fear around engaging police.
I can tell you that I have not been asked a question by Immigration and Naturalization. I can't remember the last time that I was asked a specific question about a specific citizen.
Sure. So I think that the concern here has to do with, for example, that at the point of arrest, when someone's fingerprints are taken, that data goes into a database that ICE has access to, and if that person is, that's a way that someone can land on ICE's radar depending on what else is in the database. So I think it's in the context
By
of.
the district attorney's office.
Yeah, so.
That is exactly correct, though.
Correct.
If we were to arrest somebody and their fingerprints were taken and the fingerprints went into the database, it would absolutely be retrievable by ICE. Right. Now, that is not a direct access conversation. It is not. That's a systemic conversation. That is not something where the Solderton Police Department or the Franconia Police Department or the Telford Police Department or Lower Salford Police Department said, we arrested person A, check their immigration status. That doesn't happen.
Right.
But what you're suggesting here does happen. But that is beyond the control of the local police department. That has absolutely.
But you're part of the systematic, rising up. And just another portion of why somebody may not feel comfortable going to the police, because that happens, and it happens a lot, at least in my 12 years working in criminal defense. And, you can start with something very small and it works its way up. I was just adding that. You might not necessarily cause it, but it may just be the beginning of something greater. And, illegal individuals know.
I wouldn't even debate that statement. The fact of the matter is, if a person gets arrested and a person gets fingerprinted and the fingerprints go into the national database, then the fingerprints are retrievable. That's not something that I would even consider debating with you, Jim. That is the way the system functions, right? And we are participants in that system, and that's it. It's just that's the way it functions.
So.
Does it ever happen that after that goes, that they come back and say, hey,
none of us can hear that here.
Could you hold him?
Have you ever been asked to hold somebody by ICE?
My police department, to the best of my knowledge, has never been asked to hold anybody by ICE. And if they did ask us, we would tell them that we will go through normal processes and normal processes only, with one exception. If ICE comes to us and says, we're holding a criminal warrant. Now let's separate this. If we're holding a criminal warrant, ICE has knowledge that the person we're holding is wanted for a crime other than an immigration crime, then we will hold. If ICE comes to us and says, we are interested in this person for an immigration issue, non-criminal, we say, we're processing him or her the way we normally would, and we're releasing them in a timely fashion.
That's consistent with the ACLU's policy, right? The best practice policies. And
You read the 9 points, and we're consistent with all 8 of them. With 8 of the 9, I'm telling you, we are very much consistent with 8 of the 9.
Back in the day in North Wales, we initially had a small detention cell that had Sesame Street characters on it. And when they remodeled, there was no place. And it would actually cost more money.
I think you and I had this conversation 5 years ago.
In Tominson or Lansdale, so it would cost more money. It would cost the city money to do that. So I'm glad that you guys don't do that, and that's possible.
Doug's question was this: if ICE calls us and says, "We know that you have a prisoner, and we know that we ICE has a one for him," if that is a criminal one, we'll hold. If it's a strictly an immigration one, we will not hold. Right? We just process as we do normally, and we release in a timely fashion. And here's something that I want you all to know. One of the biggest liabilities every police department has is the maintenance of prisoners. When you have a prisoner in your cell, that is an incredibly liable situation. We get our prisoners out of our cells as quickly as we possibly can. And there's 3 methods. 1, release with summons. 2, release to the prison. And 3, release. Right? And we want them out of that cell as quickly as we possibly can. Thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead and kind of turn to the next question that we got from the batch, unless there's a police chief who also wants to speak to this. But the next question that the audience member asked had to do with what kind of guidance can be offered to schools, could be offered to places of employment, and I can think of other examples, hospitals, other kinds of spaces in the community that have an interest in maybe line drawing, if possible, to prevent ICE enforcement action or to make it more cumbersome than it might otherwise be. And I think that the question was whether there's readily available guidance for how to go about that, and I can tell you in short that the answer is yes. There's readily available guidance, and I would encourage anyone in the audience who works in a school, who works in a hospital, or who has connections to schools or hospitals, or other kinds of spaces in the community, including places of employment. If you have an interest in knowing what can be done by way of internal procedures that might disincentivize ICE enforcement, or that might make ICE enforcement in that space less easy than it would otherwise be, please reach out to the ACLU of Pennsylvania. We have legal intake cards on the table, and we can talk through the actions that can be taken and offer materials in that vein. Quickly, I'll say that of the spaces that I just rattled off, schools in particular are supposed to be treated as sensitive locations under ICE's own policies. In practice, whether in fact they're being treated as such, I think is very much a question. And I think whether areas around and on the way to schools, whether they fall under the umbrella of that sensitive location status is, I think, up for debate as well. So this is to say that ICE itself historically and still hews to a policy that recognizes that schools are not proper targets for enforcement actions, but we know that in practice they're being swept up in the sort of dragnet enforcement that we've seen since President Trump took office. So the quick answer is reach out to the ACLU of Pennsylvania. We're happy to work with you one-on-one to let you know what can be done in a given community space to make ICE enforcement a little bit more difficult than it might otherwise be, but in a permissible way. I think that the next question, I think, is going to be for all of the panelists, and it was a request for examples of acts of hate in the community, and whether folks have seen an uptick in such acts since the start of the new administration. And I think now would be maybe a good time for Lee to kind of speak to that maybe in a broad way, and then she can turn the floor over to her fellow panelists to kind of speak to specific instances.
So the quick answer, absolutely. Some people talk about 5%, some people talk about 50%. The bottom line is this, that just in our small area, immediately the gravestones were knocked over in a Jewish cemetery. A woman in Doylestown waiting in a Starbucks with a Star of David on her was told, "This is our country now, you Jew." An African-American woman coming out, and these are people I know, an African-American woman coming out of college at 10 o'clock at night waiting at the bus. A man verbally assaulted her and said, "This is Trump country now, you need to get out." I work with people on dialysis, and I have never witnessed something like I've witnessed, which is a patient taunting an undocumented patient who's on a machine, a life support machine, and says, "Are you worried now?" If this patient, if any of my patients who are undocumented are deported, they'll die. So, and this hasn't stopped. So, it's brutal, and it's painful, and these assaults are not just one and done. The ramifications, they're long-lasting.
I'll just briefly add to those chilling anecdotes that I routinely am met with similar types of stories. I have a family out in Stevens, Pennsylvania, who are routinely harassed by their neighbors and by the managers of their property. There's the gentleman, he has 2 young daughters, One of the neighbors is routinely going to his daughter's windows, and they're hijabi. So he comes to the window and he's trying to look into their window and peep in while they're getting dressed. They're routinely called terrorists. They're African American Muslims, so they also hear routine racial slurs. They've been physically assaulted, and then the person who assaulted them said that they were assaulted, and then brought charges against them after they at least requested charges were brought against them once they were assaulted. And I've had dozens of people, literally dozens of people, call me and tell me that they're routinely harassed at work. Everything from being called a terrorist, being told to get out of the country, it's not their country anymore. Instances of physical assault. Someone just called me today. His Quran was desecrated at work. Someone wrote some unspeakable things in his Quran and damaged it. But these are types of calls that I receive almost every day. And so, and again, like I said, I don't even have to watch the news. I know when the president says something because there's always an uptick. Even when he says something, it's almost immediate within days of him making a comment, whether it's the S-hole countries or some of the things he said at the State of the Union or some of the things he said in other places. I'm met within days of more people saying that I'm getting harassed at work, my children are harassed at school. There was a woman, her son, I believe, was 10. He was knocked unconscious at school by a bully. And again, he's Muslim, and they said some derogatory things to him and then assaulted him. But these things are happening in America every day. And one thing, I was on a panel earlier this week, and I told them, we often laud ourselves for the progress that we've made, but one of the examples I gave was George Wallace ran for president 4 times. And 4 times the general public said, we will not have someone sitting in our highest office who espouses this type of rhetoric. And President Trump ran on a similar type of rhetoric in ways that are eerily similar to George Wallace's routine, his campaigns. And he's the president of the United States right now. And with that comes people who are emboldened by the things that he says. Richard Spencer, who is an avowed white supremacist, says that my worldview is affirmed by the president's rhetoric. And not only is it affirmed by it, but what was once obscure is now mainstream. David Duke, former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, has talked about the president shares his views. These are avowed white supremacists who are hell-bent on the destruction of non-white people and want this nation to be a nation of white people and white people only. And these are people who are saying the President of the United States shares my views, and I thank him for it.
I'd like to speak as a parent of a child of color, because as a white person, I can walk in spaces and expect and receive a certain kind of treatment that I would have never questioned before I realized that my child doesn't walk in the shoes and will never walk in the shoes that I can. So yes, I lawyered up before leaving the country. I had my child have a Know Your Rights and carry an immigration attorney's card before she went through immigration, because for the first time I was concerned that since she is old enough to be called by herself and I cannot accompany her as she goes through immigration processing, that the place of her birth might lead to other questions. That within the immigration space, she doesn't have, none of us do, have the same levels of rights and protections in that space as you're crossing a border. Yes, my child actually does carry proof of citizenship with her now because she's too young to have a driver's license, so I got her a passport card because I don't want her to carry her passport, too valuable and too difficult to replace, but a passport card is proof of citizenship. And yes, I have friends whose children have gone to get driver's licenses on expired passports and been turned away because an expired passport is not proof of citizenship, no matter what you may think. And after the election, my child, right here in North Penn School District, saw a significant uptick in racial harassment that she personally received, that she observes other children of color receiving. So it doesn't matter whether your child is African American, Bangladeshi American, Indian American, people of color are, what was under the surface is above the surface now. And we can do something about it. I mean, to put one small glimmer of hope here, we do have a former leader of the Nazi Party running unopposed on a Republican ticket in Illinois. And on NPR this afternoon, I heard a bunch of Illinois Republicans telling everybody to go out and vote for the Democrat because this man did not represent their party, and they did not want to see this man elected. So we can all do small things, even if it's uncomfortable and crossing lines, but we do have to do those things. Anybody else want to address?
Have you seen any violence and hate crimes that reached your level of policing?
For 31 years, I've seen people who were bigots. I cannot and be arrested for hate crime. I personally, and I can say in our department, in our borough, we have not seen a remarkable amount of reported, but I can tell you that it occurs. It occurs, at different places, and I've heard stories, but nothing where it has come directly to our attention. Not anything significant.
So I think given where we are with time, it might be that we'll have to carry on the dialogue that we've begun today at some future date. To kind of echo what Anne concluded with, though, you've heard from all of these panelists about the very real impacts on the ground for folks who are affected by these policies and practices on the part of the government, and then how those policies and practices embolden hateful acts by fellow citizens who are sympathetic to those views. And I think Anne made the very important point that that puts a burden on those of us who are concerned, who are affected, to do our part in voicing and unpacking the underlying premises that fuel those policies and practices at the governmental level, and that fuel the rhetoric both at the governmental level and in the public. And that's something that Timothy spoke to earlier on in our discussion. So what are some of those premises that we can unpack? What does it mean to be American, right? We know what the president might say, or what supporters of the president might say. There has to be, I think, a vigorous voicing of another conception that all of us, I think, adhere to, or most of us, many of us maybe adhere to. So what does it mean to be American? What is America about? In our communities, who are members of our communities? What do our communities look like? I think something else that's key here is that a lot of immigrant households in PA and elsewhere in the country, data bears out that they are mixed households. Some members may be U.S. citizens, some may be lawful permanent residents, others may have a temporary status, others may lack status completely. And when we talk about chilling effects, the chilling effects aren't limited to those who are subject to immigration consequences. Those chilling effects extend to everyone in the household and outward into the community. And those chilling effects have costs. So I think that the point being here that there's something that everyone in this room can do to keep up their end of a dialogue that has to keep going forward, and there are concrete actions that everyone can take, like the ones that the panelists have identified. However dire things may feel, I think there's still cause for hope in how we can make sure that the status quo doesn't remain as is, but improves. So thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Tom and Doug for the program closing.
I'm gonna add one more comment because I'm gonna plug some new events here.
Okay.
So we're really just delighted as the local People Power Group, and we go beyond Lansdale. We're so delighted to connect with the Indivisible Hope Group. We do have a Google group where we send out very, very few messages, only a couple times a month. So I'm going to put this back over by your sign-in sheets, and if you'd like to get onto our Google group, we would really love to let you know what we have coming up. And I can tell you that we have 2 things coming up. We're going to be partnering with a Chester People Power Group that's going to be working on, if you're really interested in getting out there and helping people exercise their civic rights, a whole day on learning how to go out and register voters. And following that, that's going to take place in March, and following that, we're going to have a celebratory event the first Thursday of April, I believe that's April 5th, in Norristown, where we're going to be promoting immigrant-owned and run businesses off the idea of a taco truck on every corner. Instead, this is National Burrito Day, so we're considering a burrito crawl through Norristown. For my own personal selfish issue, we would love to have you sign postcards as well as a petition. So I'm going to put that out on the Adoptee Rights Campaign if you'd like to let your congressmen and senators know that you care about the issue. So are we going to have Lee close? Yeah. You want to have Lee close first?
What's that?
We'll have Lee close first?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so let me tell you something that some of you might not know. White people carry a lot of power right now. And if you don't say anything, if you don't step up, then you're complicit. And that really matters. White men have the most power, and then white women. It's more important than ever for you to step up. So some of the things that we've done, and I'm hoping this will be helpful, is, for example, as I told you earlier, the KKK dropped flyers in Upper Dublin. We had a vigil. They dropped flyers in Willow Grove. We had a vigil tonight. We created a training called Interrupting Hate. And it's an incredible training where you learn when you're out in public and you see somebody being verbally or physically abused, how to safely make sure that you can interrupt it. This is something that can be done in the schools. This is something everybody should know how to do. Because if you see something, you need to say something. Because if you don't say anything, then you're condoning that behavior. The other thing we've done is we've had 2 immigration trainings from some immigration attorneys from Philadelphia who have taught us specifically some of the questions that you've been asking. Like, if someone stops me, do I have to tell them where I'm from? Do I have to give them an ID? And it's also how to protect our undocumented neighbors. What steps can we do? So that we've had that. And these are all things you all can do up in this area, because we are Montgomery County, but majority of our stuff has been in Dresher and down in Jenkintown. The other thing we've done is we've had 3 solidarity suppers, and we've had over 170 people attend. These include anybody and everybody. The queer communities, I went to a mosque for the first time in my life. How many people have been to a mosque? I know, rock and roll, right? Isn't the food amazing? Because they're always willing to feed you the best. The point is, it's time to take it one step further, which is what we're attempting to do. It's no longer about tolerating. It's no longer about, hey, that's great they're here. The fact is that it's really important that you become friends, that you get invited to Ramadan to break the fast, that you go to Passover, that you help people build a community building for their gay and lesbian alliance. Because when we do that, we are holding so deeply to our base selves of just being human. I saw a man tonight get up for a person who came in. And I thought, what a decent thing for him to do. A young man got up and told a woman who was older, why don't you take my seat? And that's all this is about. It's just being decent and kind. But you're going to have to stretch yourselves because there's going to be uncomfortable times. So I'm encouraging all of you. I do have cards. I don't know if you're interested. We're called Learn Local Emergency Action Response Network. You can check out, I don't have Facebook. We do have a Facebook page. But we also have email, and we do put out flyers. You're welcome to see what we're doing if you want to do it, or join us, or come to the Solidarity Supper. The point is small things matter. And if you ever see somebody who is in danger or who's been hurt, don't make it a one and done. Don't make it a, hey, I'm really sorry that happened. Make it a, hey, can I have your number? Why don't we go out and have coffee sometime? Let me get to know you. One of the best things that happened, I met a family who's been here for 4 years from Pakistan. I met them a year ago. They came about a year and a half ago. They came to our Solidarity Suppers. They have 4 beautiful kids ranging from 10 to 21. This past summer, their 2 eldest sons came on vacation with me to Rhode Island. And we went to Ocean City together, which was really hilarious. But the point was, is I took all these pictures, and I made a calendar, and I gave it to them for the holidays. And I said, new friends. And it was at that point that the father, who teaches at community college in Philadelphia, sent me a text and an email, and he said, I finally feel at home. It was so easy, and it was so good. So that's all I'm saying is it's small steps, but if you have any questions or if you ever have any concerns or ideas, we're up for supporting anything, but most importantly, we got to stand up. Thank you.
Thank you.